All right, here we go. Let me just double check that everything is working out okay, and then we will continue this journey. I think that's good. I think we're almost there. Let me share this on our favorite platform, Twitter, and then we will continue with the festivities of the day. Thank you all for showing up if you're currently here. And we'll get on it. All right, give me just a sec. Let me get to this. Here we go. Here we go. Let me just share it real quick. Here we go. Back to Twitter. Here we go. Here we go. Putting the post up here. I apologize for the delay. Here we go. Okay. All right, so we are, I believe, live. And that means it's time to start the show. Thank you all for joining and coming on out. This is UnShrink Me. I am technically Dr. Patrick Lockwood, but for the purposes of this podcast, I'm just Patrick because don't sue me. This is UnShrink Me. If you don't know, the reason I call this UnShrink Me is simply because it is my belief that much of the mental health industry, the mental health conglomerate index, whatever groups are not run well, and that many people in my profession are either misguided and or misapprehensive or misunderstanding what we're here to do. And so in the spirit of trying to create a more informed consumer public with my knowledge and experience, but also trying to be funny if it's at all possible sometimes, that's the goal of UnShrink Me, is to call out the bad actors, discuss what makes sense and doesn't make sense, and to create a more informed consumer base and hopefully be funny once in a while. Thank you all for coming out. Please like, share, and subscribe so that we can get more people chatting, get more people asking good questions and sharing their opinions so that we can have a real dialogue at some point. All right, so I think in terms of housekeeping, that's it. Please don't sue me, but feel free to cancel me. So as you all may or may not know, the whole purpose of UnShrink Me is to go to mostly wild things that are said on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it, and then try to base some of the discussion here on that. And let's see where we need to start off, because there's always dozens of posts that I bookmark for this show, and almost always I don't get to all of them simply because there's just so much to talk about. And as always, we are not formally sponsored by Celsius, but God, this is good. So thank you so much to Celsius for their unofficial sponsorship, their non-sponsorship of this show. All right, so moving right along. Where to start? There's just so many cool things to start with here. Let's start with, I don't know, let me see. Okie dokie. There's this thing that was talked about last week with regard to ADHD. And one of the ongoing trends is to discuss how horrible it is that so many young people are being diagnosed. I think it's something like 23% of American 17-year-olds are diagnosed with ADHD. That doesn't make sense for any mental illness, but I guess that's where it is. So just beware that, like, the things that were said last week on this podcast, I would like to carry over into this particular conversation, which is There's many different groups of people. I walked through a decision model of different types of subtypes of behaviors and issues that may or may not relate to personality differences, which is a big focus of today's show, or actual attention deficits, or actual anxiety and trauma issues that are seeming like ADHD but are actually not. Also, some people just don't want to sit still in school because why are we supposed to sit still all day? How does that make any sense? That makes no sense. Anyways, so what would I know? There's a new there's a new article, that came out in the Telegraph last week that said that there's a link between hormone therapy for transgender folks and cancer. That's not good. I wonder what other terrible things we'll learn about trying to put people on hormones before they're ready. All right, let's talk a little bit about suicide real quick, because I think this is relatively reasonable and worthwhile. So there's been a lot of research that's come out in the last couple of weeks on models of prevention for suicide. And obviously, if you've listened at all, I've said I don't want people to die by suicide. I think that's bad. I don't think suicide is good. I understand why in some very, very rare cases, people think that's the most reasonable choice in their life, whether it's severe medical illnesses that are terminal and so on and so forth. But for the average person that's experiencing suicidal ideation, it's often considered a crisis or a serious issue of concern, which is perfectly valid. And then there's this other complicated narrative and window into the idea of suicidality. So there's this guy named Systemic Texism, which let me retweet his post so everyone knows. So Systemic Texism says, I'm not telling you anything you didn't know, but a big part of the problem is that the treatment systems view suicidal thinking as the disease, when it's actually a tertiary symptom, as in not even secondary. So primary, secondary, tertiary. But the treatment systems abhor anything they can't categorize with remarkable ease so they can bill and or deny billing. Pursuit of health is the preventative answer. I'm going to go do some uphill sprints now. So that's good. So there's a couple important things that Systemic Texism said. And just to pick a couple of them out that might be worth you considering if you have someone you know who's struggling with suicidal ideation, because, again, it's very serious. We don't want anyone to die by suicide. I think if it's possible, that would be ideal. And I think no one's in disagreement about that. And then there's this other problem systemically, because the mental health system is built the way it is, right? So the systemic issue is people see suicidal ideation in our profession as this terrible, horrific crisis. And sometimes it actually is, obviously. But then there's this other problem. And the other problem is that in many cases, suicidal ideation, with or without a plan, is not the actual problem the person's struggling with. So people are struggling with primary issues like pervasive, persistent psychological pain that doesn't even change with psych meds, or serious disenfranchisement or alienation from society or their family because of divorce, death, job loss, things like that. So there's really core issues that are very serious that deserve clinical attention in many cases that don't get the attention they need because we're so worried about the symptom, right? The secondary or tertiary symptom, right? Because like intermediate between the serious pain and the SI, the suicidal ideation, is like core negative beliefs or whatever it is. And all those things are valid and worth attention as well. But we worry so much about the suicidal ideation because there's all these campaigns and all these like inflated statistics that are often not correct. And so the problem becomes, what do we do with this fear porn about suicidal ideation and all these endless campaigns of mostly useless prevention, unfortunately, approaches and programs when there are like seriously useful things, right? So There are crisis hotlines. There's the Trevor Project. There's suicide hotlines, which are all extremely useful. And then secondary to that are all these stupid campaigns that you see on college campuses and on billboards and things like that, which don't actually do anything to my knowledge, but all they do is they try to make the suicidal ideation the primary problem when it's not, right? And that is what he's kind of pointing to. And so the other problem is the treatment system is so geared to the worst possible illness and treating the most severe life-threatening thing that we miss all the primary things that could be managed that cause the eventual suicidal ideation. So like you can't bill for therapy if someone doesn't have major depressive disorder because it hasn't been 6 months since their life has been a giant catastrophe to the point that they develop these terrible symptoms. But if you actually get a chance to see that person 6 months earlier when they just lost their job and their life is starting to fall apart, or psychologically they feel like they're falling apart, but you can't bill for it because there's no F code that you can bill for, that is how screwed up this system is. That is how bad the healthcare system is. That's how bad the mental health profession is. Is like you can't really technically even diagnose adjustment disorder unless there's pervasive impairment or distress. And the issue with that is like if you just lost your job and you're just kind of in that numb figuring it out phase, you might not have pervasive impairment or distress. And so there's just so many scenarios where because of the way the healthcare system views symptoms and illness and only wants to reimburse for like the worst possible scenario basically across the board, so many people never engage in preventative therapy, preventative medicine, all right? Like burnout's another good example, something I deal with in a lecture on. It's like there's so many preventative medicine kinds of things we could do for burnout, like burnout support groups and all these kinds of things that nobody will pay for. I would be shocked if a managed care company is like, you know what? Our own employees are failing and miserable. Let's do what we can to pay for services that might make them less miserable. But no, it's profits over people, which is unfortunately, most businesses, at least in the West, and it's really fucking stupid. And that's why so many people are turning to alternative career paths, right? Like everyone bitches and complains about people trying to do porn and OnlyFans and things like that. But you know what? Be an influencer, right? If your employer is going to screw you because they don't really care about who you are and community doesn't matter anymore, then fuck them. Go make some money. You know, that's what I think, because once upon a time, culture mattered. Once upon a time, community mattered. But instead, because we live in this hyper-capitalist, hyper-corporatist world, mental health, community, all the preventative medicine that I care about as a professional and as a person for my personal life, you could never get it paid for with insurance. You could never get it paid for with your employer health plan. There is no EAP for preventative medicine. And then these companies do the dumbest thing, and they spend money on all these consultants who don't know shit because they're not actually psychologists or they're not actually professors, whatever. They don't know anything because they just know what their consulting manual tells them. The Myers-Briggs, which is used by so many of these terrible consulting firms, which is absolute garbage. But the people who are, purveyors of the Myers-Briggs, they know what the lineage is. Or they talk about emotional intelligence, which is another garbage concept. But it's just, there's systems that are created to reinforce ideas that keep people profitable, that don't actually help people. And helping people isn't sexy, but increasing the bottom line is sexy. And that is the problem that we all face, is that no one actually gives a shit about mental health and being a well person. It's about surviving in society, and you should just learn to adjust. And kind of like the conservative mantras, like pull yourself up by your bootstraps. It's like, yes, and it can't be that people are promising that we're going to take care of you as a person. We care about you. And by the way, fuck your mental health. Let's not pay for preventative medicine, which is most companies, small employers, big employers, because people don't really care about people. People care more about profits than people. And you have to run a business, which is totally fine. But I don't know. That's my rant. It started with like a talk about suicide and things like that, but like here we are. Here we are. Here we are. Maybe I'm fired, whatever. So, this is where we're at in society, and nobody wants to listen because nobody has the time, the energy, or the bandwidth, or the money. If any of these companies actually cared about their employees, they would pay for preventative services, right? These fancy tech companies like, Meta, Facebook, X, whatever, like some of them will pay for like massages and things like that, but also they'll work you like a dog. And so that's not even really preventative medicine. It's just kind of like a Band-Aid for how horrible you're going to be treated because you're willing to work like a slave and bust your ass for 70 hours a week, and maybe you'll make good money, but you'll be demoralized as a person because it's like your only job is to keep this big giant machine moving and not to be a real person, right? And that's the problem with society. Society is not tuned for mental health. Now there's a post that I want to talk about right now, and let me retweet it real quick. So there's this guy named Chris Palmer, and please share your thoughts for those of you who are watching. So Chris Palmer is a psychiatrist, I think from Harvard, right? Kind of a popular chap. So Chris, he's an interesting guy. I think he cares about metabolic health and brain health. And so he talks about the ketogenic diet and its possible impact on psychiatric illnesses. And that's cool because I think maybe there's something there, right? So he put out this post on April 22nd, a few days ago. And I just wanted to be in support of Chris because I think Chris is correct. So Chris sent out this tweet that posted a link to healthcare spending in the United States. He said healthcare spending on patients with mental health diagnoses is over twice as much compared to those without mental health conditions. However, most of this spending is on comorbid physical health conditions. So what if we treated the whole person? So I think his point is, if I'm understanding his tweet correctly, healthcare providers of all kinds are mostly focusing on the medical issues, but not the mental health issues. So it's like you have diabetes, but you also have, mild major depressive disorder. We're going to browbeat you about taking your insulin, but not try to help you with behavioral activation for your depression symptoms, for instance. And so what if we spent equally on the metabolic and the brain and the mental health, for instance, is his point. And so just to speak in support of that for just a second extemporaneously, my problem with my profession in the mental health world that's not psychiatric is that most people think that if you just talk about your childhood enough and get a secure attachment and all this crap, that magically you're going to take better care of yourself. And I don't know how to tell this to my colleagues who think that the body doesn't really matter to the same degree that the mind does. There's no amount of attachment and security that's going to make you not lazy, right? You might feel a little more safe and a little more motivated, but like you can't do enough exposure therapy on trauma to also deal with diabetes and heart disease. Like a lot of people in the United States in particular are metabolically compromised. They have some on a spectrum of like mild to severe, a great deal of like pre-diabetes and pre-heart disease, blood pressure issues. They're not sleeping. They're eating terrible food. And so like you can't just do exposure therapy with people who have PTSD, for instance. And so to Chris's point, yes, doctors, primary care doctors, etc., should be figuring out a way to address the mental health issues more and refer out more to people like myself and all the thousands of therapists in the country that might be good at their job, right? But also people in the mental health world, LMFTs, LPCCs, psychologists, psychiatrists, every one of us needs to be more in the body and into metabolic health. So like Chris Palmer, I am fully in support of your mission, and I'm very frustrated with my side of the problem because we think that if we just do behavioral activation correctly, it will help people with mild to moderate major depressive disorder, which it's true. It does help, but it's not going to actually do shit for the people that really, really need. Like a lot of people, more than you know, a lot of people need to focus on their body just as much as they're coping with depression or anxiety or whatever they're working with. I promise you that there is a physical health crisis in this country that is not just obesity and diabetes and heart disease, even though those three things are out of control in this country, in the United States of America, which should be a source of great shame for every government official. Every oligarch and every person in power should feel great shame about how much they fucked their people, because your desire to be in power and in control and be America's the best and Team America and all that shit is killing people. You don't care about your people. And it's very disgusting. And the truth of the matter is that this is such a cool country politically and socially and economically in terms of its principles and all that stuff. But all that gets washed away by how horrible we treat ourselves. Which is just, there's like so much low-hanging fruit of that online, right? And obviously the online world is not the real world. You can go have coffee right now and no one's going to scream at you about Trump or Biden or whatever. But the truth of the matter is this little microcosm of social media is proof of how much we don't actually value each other anymore. We have learned to devalue each other and devalue our bodies because we're so focused on our minds, which is such bullshit. It's as if they're separate things when they're really not. And everybody in my profession should know better. You know, one of the things I'm proud of at my university is all of my students, I feel very comfortable sending them out into the world to become professionals because they're clearly aware that the human mind and mental illness is extremely complicated. They know how difficult it is to treat a person because you're not just treating one single individual in a vacuum. You're treating a person, a whole person who's part of a complicated microsystem and mesosystem and then a political system and a national system and an economic system. It's not just like teach them to cope better and their depression will disappear. That's bullshit. And everyone I know in my little sphere of people is aware of that, and I'm so proud to be part of that circle of people because they actually give a shit. And so few people are self-centered and so narcissistically interested in what they believe is the truth that they're not even willing to do the basic thing, which is like maybe send the patient to their doctor. Maybe if they are struggling with depression, have they gotten their blood checked for hormone issues or vitamin issues? Like, so many people are deficient in so many things, like metabolically, vitamins, hormones. Like, go take care of your body. It's not complicated. But if we can just teach people to cope better or understand the antecedents to their behaviors and their consequences, everything is going to be better, which is bullshit. And I think everyone I know that I respect is aware of that and does their best, right? But so many people are cowards. They're cowards in the sense that they're not willing to even encourage family therapy or couples therapy. They don't encourage like looking at the whole person, the whole system that the person finds himself in, because none of us are living in a vacuum. None of us are merely only affected by our thoughts and our feelings and our values. Our thoughts and our feelings or our values affect us individually the most, but we're part of complicated ecosystems. All of us. Our job ecosystem, our spiritual ecosystem, our family ecosystem. There's all these ecosystems that we're being bombarded by and interacting with all day. And so, Chris, I'm with you, Chris Palmer. I appreciate you so much. And what I will tell you is that our side of the aisle sucks at dealing with the body, and we need to do better. We need to do way better. Just like the medical professions need to do better at addressing the mind and behavior patterns and maybe treat people with respect and not tell them they're stupid for not taking their insulin and talking down to them. Psychologists and LMFTs and LPCCs of people of all kinds, of all degrees, can maybe, encourage people to eat a little better, go to the gym more, work out more, sleep better, put the fucking phone down at night, stop taking caffeine 6 hours before bed. Very simple, obvious things. But what would I know? I'm just a psychologist. But in this case, I'm just Patrick. All right. Rant over. Alrighty. My next tweet is from a person I don't know, but I'm going to try and read it in good faith and explain what I think is true. And I will just repost it right now so I can... there's a timestamp, etc. Okay. So this person that I'm talking about, whom I've never met, I think, their name is Sammy Timimi. I don't know. And their handle is at STIMIMI. I don't know. It was posted on 4/19. So this person said, mental health ideology may be the biggest and most powerful cause of mental health problems today, which is a very incendiary tweet. So let me explain what I think this person's trying to say in the best possible light. And then let me share my perspective on why I think they're wrong. So mental health ideology, which is, I think what they mean by that is this idea that everyone should seek therapy and everyone's some kind of sick and nobody's perfect and all that kind of crap, right? This very much like everyone needs to address their trauma and everyone has childhood stuff, which is totally fine because we're trying to like, the idea behind those people is they're trying to make it less stigmatizing for people to get therapy and take care of their health and maybe take meds or whatever it is. So that's mental health ideology, I think, that this person's referring to. And they said this may be the biggest and most powerful cause of mental health problems today. So here's what I agree with. I agree that when you start broadcasting all day, every day, like what I was just saying about suicide prevention, all the bullshit prevention campaigns that actually aren't doing anything, but they're just fear-mongering, that's a problem because it is encouraging people to catastrophize about something, which is, if you don't know, like suicide is actually fairly rare, comparatively speaking. Of all the causes of death for all the age groups, it's still a very rare way that people die. It's not a good thing. I don't want more people to die that way. Please don't lambaste me as someone who wants people to die that way. I'm just telling you that it's not the catastrophe that people make it out to be in terms of like a societal-wide crisis, right? Obesity, heart disease, alcohol use, other drugs, right? Like there's so many other things that kill people way more frequently, way more worse, and are worse for society compared to suicide. So like, let's be clear. But just like that fear porn campaign on behalf of suicide prevention, the same is true for everything else. It's totally true that in the last 15 years, there's so many, literally so many reasons that this person is correct, right? So there was the trans madness where everyone's like, oh my God, they're transing the children and all this shit. Or like everyone has autism. RFK Jr. is going to figure out what's causing autism. And so it's all these things that are just such nonsense. So there's all this fear porn about autism and trans and, there's the opioid epidemic and there's all these things, right? And so if you just look at the news headlines and you look at the culture war and you look at what the politicians talk about, you would think that basically everyone in this country, in the world, is dying from depression, heart disease, drugs, and things like that, which is just not true, statistically speaking. That's not what the epidemiological data actually says. And so this person, Sammy Timimi, or whatever your name is, I hear you. Like, I hear you that this, like, everybody should see a therapist culture is stupid. No, the vast majority of people that have mild distress from whatever supposed mental health symptoms they have don't even need therapy. They need better friends and better family and maybe better sleep and better exercise. But like the people with moderate to severe pathology definitely need therapy. It's actually very helpful for them. Now, could more people benefit from therapy even if they don't necessarily need it, like it's life-saving? Sure. But that's not the same as saying they should be in therapy. So this idea that everyone should be in therapy and everyone would benefit from therapy is just crap. If you have healthy friends, healthy relationship, healthy family, hobbies, sleep, diet, exercise, sex, all these things, you don't need therapy. You don't need therapy. If you got the money and you got the time, God bless, go do it. But like that's a paid best friend at that point. If your life is genuinely good, you're taking care of yourself, you got spirituality, you got physical health, you got your family and your friends, and it's all generally working for you, probably don't need therapy, right? So I'm with you, but I don't think it's the biggest cause. I think the biggest cause of mental health problems today is politicization of mental health, stigma, and people that are pathologizing themselves. That's the problem, is people are self-pathologizing, which is stupid. I get it because like WebMD, it's the WebMD effect, right? Like everyone can go to WebMD and diagnose themselves with cancer and heart disease and diabetes and major depression. But like, I think it's more complicated. I think mental health culture, whatever that is part of the problem. I think there's the availability heuristic. There's the WebMD effect. I think there's a lot of reasons why people generally think they're sick when they're not. Also, a lot of people are just appropriately stressed out for the circumstances they find themselves in, right? Like, if you just lost your job, you should probably feel like shit because it's probably hard on you. That makes sense. If someone just died, you should probably be grieving and you should probably be feeling some version of sad, angry, hopeless, whatever it is. So a lot of people misunderstand that very normal reactions to obvious stressors, those aren't the same thing as diagnoses, right? This happened during COVID. So many people thought they had mental health problems, when reality was we were all living through a terrible fucking time in history, shoved into our homes by fear-mongering public health professionals who are idiots who don't understand the first thing about health, and like fear porn on the internet, fear porn from our colleagues, fear porn from the government. It's just, we were being fed stress, fed a diet of stress everywhere, when in reality, it wasn't the catastrophe that people said it was going to be. And that's the problem. That's why I wrote a book called The Fear Problem. You can see it back there on that shelf there, on the far end there in yellow and white. Like, literally, we have no healthy relationship with our emotions because our parents suck at teaching us how to have a relationship with ourselves. Because we've lost our ability to be regular people, we all have to be special and social media stars. Or we all have to be workaholics and make hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars. Or we all have to be whatever someone's idea of politically healthy is. So there's all these stupid things that people care about that just don't fucking matter. And we've made ourselves sick socially. And because of that, that's the bigger problem. So I disagree with you, Sammy, Timimi, or whatever your name is. Like, society sucks. And I don't mean society in like your little microcosm of like, your Starbucks or your church or your gym or whatever. I mean like society at large sucks because society at large is dominated by major corporations. It's dominated by social media. It's dominated by politicians and the news media. And all four of those groups of people can just fuck all the way off because they don't actually care about you. They care about their money at the expense of your well-being. Specifically, they create these algorithms and they write these headlines to get you fired up. So fuck them specifically. So I actually blame them more than I blame like mental health ideology. Has that gotten me fired yet? Oh, that's good. Alan Francis. I've talked about him before. If you don't know him, his Twitter handle is at ALLENFRANCES at Alan Francis MD. Let me just tweet about it real quick because he's amazing. So Alan said on, when did he say this? He said this 5 days ago. 5 days ago. This is a really great post because I think it's one of those inside baseball things that everyone should know, but which kind of nicely dovetails with what I literally just said. And I'm open to all feedback or criticism of what I just said, by the way. So feel free if you want. So Alan Francis said, and never forget, every differential diagnosis should include, quote unquote, no mental disorder. Many patients present with normal, expectable distress of everyday life. Like I just said, every treatment plan should include watchful waiting and no treatment, in quotes, for mild transient problems often resolve with time. So here's one of those lovely, God bless you, Alan. Thank you so much. Here's the deal. Like, literally, it's the case. Literally, it is the case that so many different illnesses that could turn into full-blown, highly problematic illnesses actually resolve. So prodromal symptoms is kind of the technical term. And so these things can resolve if you have the correct lifestyle plan and the correct diet, all these things, and like healthier relationships, assertiveness skills, all these things, which might be benefited by therapy, for instance. So I'm all about preventative medicine in those cases, preventative therapy in those cases. So it's very much the case that many people that think they have a disorder actually do not. They're having an expectable reaction to an obvious, real, predictable life stressor, right? Great example of this are mild substance use disorders. So to my knowledge, which I hope I have right because it's kind of my specialty, but like to my knowledge, people that are diagnosable with a mild substance use disorder, diagnostically, often resolve with no therapy, no meds, nothing. And the reason is because one of two things reliably happens when you have a mild drug problem. A mild alcohol problem, a mild heroin problem, a mild cannabis problem, whatever. People with a mild problem often do not go on to developing a more severe problem because either A, they experience consequences which wake them up and push them away from their current pattern of use, either towards less frequent, less intense use, or abstinence. Or B, the other thing that often happens is they naturally, without noticeable consequences, go, okay, I need to change my patterns of behavior because it doesn't serve me. Now, that's a large percentage of people with a mild substance use disorder. A substantial majority of them never need treatment and they naturally stop on their own or attenuate their use on their own. And they go back to more typical non-problematic use, which is true for a lot of mental health issues. Now, some people either don't have a lot of social support or don't have much insight or don't have good family and friends or don't have good life skills or communication skills. And so in those situations, they're more likely to move on and develop a more severe, persistent, impairing illness. That's different. So those people need preventative therapy or they need maintenance therapy. So what he called watchful waiting. Watchful waiting is great. There's so many people that have a mild diagnosis of something where I hope they see a therapist once a month or something or a doctor and they just like have someone keeping an eye on them and encouraging them to do all the preventative things that actually are good for them. That would be great because it works. It works great actually. So what would I know? But thank you, Alan, because you're so correct. It's absolutely 100% the case, 100% the case that so many people who think they're sick are not. Maybe not yet or just not in reality, right? There's so many predictable life stressors that should make you feel like shit. Did you screw up in your romantic relationship? You should probably feel guilty and maybe not sleep so good because maybe your brain's trying to teach you something. Maybe you're being warned about how stupid your behavior is, right? That's not weird. That's actually adaptive. That is adaptive. When you do something wrong, when you violate your principles, you should feel bad. That's bad for you. That's not the same thing as having a mental illness, right? And there's so many versions of that, what I just described, that are not mental illness, right? It's insane. So thank you, Alan. I appreciate you in a way that you can't even understand. Okie dokie. Oh, let's talk a little bit about the university. So 5 days ago, uh, there's this kid whose Twitter handle is at IM underscore ROI underscore LAE. So at I'm Roy Lee. So Roy Lee has created this really cool AI driven app plugin called Cluely. He was kicked out of Columbia University, I think, because he created a way to cheat on your desktop when you're doing job interviews and stuff like that. And basically, the original post is like, Columbia kicks this kid out, and within a few months, he's got a $5 million seed round and a world-class launch video. Universities are so fucking retarded in 2025. And then my response to that, which I'll retweet right now so you can all track me and criticize me. Maybe I can get fired for this one. As I said, I agree. Universities failing to adapt to technology and changes in the economy is tragic. But entrepreneurs of all kinds and new careers are being born out of the death of the university. So just to be clear to everybody involved, I absolutely love my university. I have been treated about as well as someone in my position could be treated at their university. I have, other than maybe salary, I have no complaints about my university because it's like I work with the best colleagues I've ever worked with in my life. They're amazing people. They're smart. They actually give a shit. And we are helping produce generations of really good psychologists, really good MFTs, and like it's a good Division III school that has good principles. So I like my university despite the issues with it. That being said, this broader comment about the failure of the university, technology is going to crush the university. I'm very convinced of that. I don't think almost any university is adapting to this. And what I hope is that universities at some point pick up on people like Roy Lee and they start to invest in that kid. That kid should be Columbia's superstar because what he did is he created a life hack. Now, that life hack is going to have negative consequences because less than qualified candidates are going to get jobs. So I get why they don't like that. But the kid's a genius. And he's a rebel. And he's an entrepreneur. And we need those kinds of people in society to create cool shit and disrupt the system. That's the whole point of entrepreneurs. The problem is that people are very terrified of new technology and how it's going to disrupt the system, which is totally valid. The other problem is that it makes universities look bad because if you can create an app that's going to negate most of your training, most of your computer science training or whatever, then like all of a sudden your degree is useless. And that's what they're terrified about, and that's why they're trying to destroy this kid. But this kid's just going to go make money, and people are going to invest in him, and he is going to create a brand new problem for society, but gift to society, in my opinion, which is, on the one hand, people are going to cheat their way through job interviews, which is a huge problem for tech companies, for engineering companies, for all these things. On the other side, on the good side, what it's going to do is it's going to force employers to not be idiots anymore and to care about their employers and ask questions. And it's going to force people to rethink their business model. Because maybe we're going to get back to a society where maybe, just maybe, with apps like Cluely, this kid created, Roy Lee, you're going to have to actually try again. And you're not just going to create these redundant layers of your company with 15 layers of middle managers and program administrators that literally nothing good's going to happen, where you have all this middle management bullshit. Really what you need are talented people with as minimal oversight as possible to get the job done, so long as the job's getting done correctly. And many of these monolithic mega corporations or whatever are probably going to start to die. And so many people are going to lose their jobs because of this, which is probably a good thing systemically, despite how bad it is for those individuals. So I'm thrilled with Roy Lee and what he's doing. And my hope, my sincere hope, is that Genuinely, the more people create these little hacks for job interviews and different types of tasks that can be routinized and double checked by humans, the more we actually have to figure out what we're actually good at and we're actually good for. Because not every human being who's smart, not every human being who's good at math should be an engineer or should be a computer scientist, for instance. Because maybe you actually suck at doing some of the job. And maybe some of that should be offboarded to tech or whatever. Like people are terrified of AI in therapy, which we talked a little bit about last week. And what I said was, I think it'll start to kill off a lot of the less than helpful therapists, which is a good thing. Because maybe the people with milder pathology, back to that watchful waiting thing Alan said, will start to get some help from these chat GPT kinds of things, such that those people don't go to therapy or go progress to worse illness, for instance. How cool is that? That doesn't mean that it's all good. It just means that it might be serving a useful purpose. And maybe we can cull the herd of professionals a little bit and people can move on and do other cool shit that's actually good for them. I think. But that's just me. What would I know? Maybe I'm fired. Yes. So this is probably another somewhat contentious thing. And I just love my buddy John. Jonathan Shedler, whom I've talked about a few times. I'm going to tweet about it real quick just to mess with him. Grateful for you, as always. Okay, here we go. So Jonathan Shedler said 5 days ago, this is a great one. I'm not sure when people started using the word, in quotes, valid in relation to feelings. It's not even clear what it means. A little clarity about what feelings are and are not. So check. Your feelings are feelings. Whatever. They are not right nor wrong. They're just what you feel. It's legitimate that you have those feelings. They're there for a reason. They do not require logical justification. So your feelings, to repeat, do not require logical justification, per Jonathan. And they should be taken seriously. Much of psychotherapy is about gaining awareness of feelings and understanding their meaning, what they mean, where they come from. But what's not correct? X. Your feelings are in no way reliable guide to what is or isn't true in reality. So your feelings are not facts about how the world works. They are in no way a reliable guide to what's true about anyone else. So if someone, quote unquote, makes you feel a type of way, that doesn't actually mean anything about them. He says, feeling strongly about something does not make it more true. He says this recognition is central to all established psychotherapy approaches. Telling someone your feelings are valid is inherently confusing because it's not very specific, right? Just to add my own clarity. So thank you, Jonathan, as always, because what the hell? Your feelings are valid is actually a pretty terrible statement in my opinion, because I know a lot of people have been invalidated in their life by their family, their romantic partners, their employers, their professors. So I get it. And there's a tricky balancing act, which is to acknowledge what the person is experiencing internally, but then you also have to help them make sense of it, because your gut reaction is probably almost always what we call a cognitive error or cognitive distortion, right? So those are things like catastrophizing or black and white thinking or generalization or overgeneralization. These are all cognitive errors. So your feeling might be based upon trauma. It might be based upon transference. It might be based upon your childhood dynamics or unhealthy expectations you developed because you had a crappy teacher or a crappy dad or whatever it is. And so your feeling makes sense and your feeling is okay, but your feeling is not an adequate, full understanding of reality. So stop caring about your feelings is my approach, actually. Believe it or not, I think caring about your feelings is dumb. And the reason's because Buddhism. which I know is probably not the segue that people were expecting in this little discussion right now, but let me explain to the best of my ability before I get canceled yet again for some other stupid thing here. So here's what I will say in summary. For the most part, feelings are valid in the sense that they're real, like Jonathan said. I'm all about that. I agree, as a clinician, as a person. But as a person who has, for instance, been a long-time meditator, even though my behavior on this podcast doesn't seem like someone who knows what mindfulness is and non-judgment is, I actually do. And for the most part, outside of this ranting I do, I'm fairly chill as a person. So here's what I will say. If you take your feelings seriously, on average, you're going to be miserable. And why do you want to be miserable? Because your feelings are part of this propaganda campaign your brain creates to keep you alive. But it's still propaganda. It's no different. Your feelings are, in my opinion, my personal opinion, not Dr. Lockwood, my personal opinion is that feelings are no different to propaganda than what Hitler and Goebbels used to drop on the youth in Germany during World War II. It's literally propaganda to get you motivated to go do something that is quote unquote good for your survival. But the problem is when your feelings are driven by trauma or shame or false expectations or wildly unrealistic expectations or lies you've been told about yourself. Like so many people have been told that they're fragile. So many people have been told by society and social media and bad life coaches and therapists that your feelings mean that society is trying to destroy you or some shit like that, which is just not true. You are not fragile. You are capable. The people who tell you you are not capable are lying to you. They're probably lying to you for like pathological compassion reasons. And fuck them, because they're not telling the truth. The truth is, despite your limitations, you are still capable. Despite your trauma, you are still capable. Despite your shame, you are still capable. Despite your difficulties with friends, you are still obviously capable. Jonathan Cogburn here says, I thought you were trying to get canceled. Well, cancel me, Jonathan. Whatever. Fuck it. Like, I'm so tired of these people who have these like Instagram versions of mental health where it's like, your feelings are valid and everything is fine. And you're going to be, it's like, if people just accept your feelings, then you're going to feel better. No, you're not. If you got everyone in the world to accept exactly how you feel, you wouldn't feel better. Because sometimes how you feel actually makes no sense. Like that is the whole point of most mental health diagnoses. OCD, PTSD, major depressive disorder. Sometimes it's highly pathological that you have those feelings. That's what a flashback is. You're hypervigilant, hyper aroused, and you're reliving a trauma. That is not reality. That is a false reality your brain has created because of trauma. That's what a flashback is. And it's terrible for you because it keeps you sick. And so, yes, your feelings are there for a reason, but they don't have an accurate correlation to the outside world. They have a correlation to the outside world, but not 100% one-to-one correlation to the outside world. And that's what people need to understand. Your feelings can make sense. Your feelings can be valid in the sense that they do mean something meaningful to you and they exist for a specific reason, but they are not like universally existentially valid. Do not attach to your feelings. If I were to give advice, which therapists never do, but if I were to give advice, I would encourage every human being on the planet to practice the Buddhist concept of non-judgment and non-attachment simultaneously. That's what I would encourage. Because when you practice non-attachment, when you don't have to have things a certain type of way, because one of the reasons we suffer in the Buddhist sense is because we are attached to, we are clinging to how things ought to be, which is like kind of how we're wired, right? But like if we can learn to have a healthier relationship with that clinging to instinct, that attachment instinct, then maybe we're less miserable. And what a world that would be. But I think a lot of people are interested in you being miserable. Like, I think a lot of people want you on their tribe. Like, I think in the political world, this is especially true. I think politicians of all flavors want you to get riled up, want you to be angry. They want you to hate the other side. They want you to hate yourself for the hypocrite that you are, so you can get all riled up and join the tribe and fight even harder for Trump or Biden or whoever the fuck. And again, fuck those people, because they don't actually care about you. They care about themselves. They care about the clicks. They care about likes. They don't care about you and who you are and what matters to you and your family and your health. They don't. They really don't. There's no oligarch that cares about your well-being. Not even the ones you like. So, all that rambling to say, yes, feelings are kind of valid in the sense that they exist for a very good reason. No, they're not valid in the sense like existentially they mean something permanent about you. Feelings are mostly propaganda. They're to motivate you to do something that's theoretically good for your survival, but if it's related to mental illness, it's not good for your survival. So, cancel me. Fuck it. Okay, we are on a roll here. Should we do one more? What should we do? There's a lot to do. There's literally a lot to do. Yeah, let's do one more real quick one. Let's talk about Jonathan one more time. Jonathan Shedler posted this a day ago. It's a quote from Seneca, the Stoic philosopher. Seneca said in this quote, they do not look for an end to their misery, but simply change the reason for it. And as apropos to what I literally just said about mindfulness, non-attachment, non-judgment, most people do not want to feel better. One thing I've learned in my professional life and my personal life simultaneously is that the vast majority of people, whether or not they're mentally ill, don't want to feel better. Because feeling better means letting go of the story in your head that you use to rationalize how badly you've been treated by the world. Or letting go of the story in your head that you use to rationalize treating yourself badly. Either or both. Because most of us attach to the story we tell ourselves all day. And until we learn to not attach to it, we're going to be miserable. And many people want to be miserable because they want to get themselves worked up. They're like justified in their anger, right? They have a rational resentment, if you want to call it that. And the problem is, everyone is sick when they're resentful. In AA, etc., in those recovery circles, they say that resentment is the dubious luxury of normal men. And what's generally meant by that is that, people that are so-called alcoholics or whatever can't get away with resentment because it destroys them and forces them back into drinking or whatever. But the truth of the matter is the word dubious is mentioned there because, it's not quite clear that normal people can do well with resentment. Non-addicts, non-alcoholics. And what I will say, just to wrap this up in terms of the main podcast here, non-attachment and non-judgment are not easy mindsets to practice. They're just not. Obviously, I've built this podcast on ranting about things, so I'm clearly attaching, right? The truth of the matter is we use our feelings, we use our distorted view of ourselves and the world to justify getting worked up and getting that propaganda campaign I talked about earlier, feelings, to propel us forward to do things. And that's typical or normal, statistically speaking. Because a lot of us have been told lies that we have to be worked up in order to care about something. You can care about something in a mindful way. You can. You can want in a mindful way. That doesn't mean you're fully not attached, but you still can. So what I would argue is this, is to just go back to the Seneca quote real quick. They do not look for an end to their misery, but simply change the reason for it. If we stop rationalizing our feelings, we'll probably do better. If we stop attaching to, if we do our work internally to attach less to what we feel, to attach less to the explanations we think are true, and try to get into a non-judgmental, non-attachment headspace, you might feel better. You might be less miserable, to talk about the Seneca quote specifically. So many more things to talk about. There's so many things I have saved. I'm so excited for next week's episode because we're going to talk narcissism and how people don't understand it. We're going to talk, what else are we going to talk about next week? We're probably going to talk about transference and countertransference. And then we'll talk about idiot compassion because Lori Gottlieb talked about it. And I want to get back to it because I think it's really cool. So thank you all for coming out to chat, Jonathan and everyone else. Watch, I appreciate everyone who has taken the time to hear me rant and burp and things of that nature. I sincerely hope that you will like and share and subscribe. Please click that subscribe button on YouTube and let more people know so that, again, the whole spirit of the UnShrink Me podcast is to criticize what is wrong with the industry, the bad players in the industry, and to talk honestly about what I think is true and potentially helpful that will increase mental health generally, but create more informed consumers so they get more out of the clinical work they receive. So that's why I'm here. I hope it makes sense. I hope this has been at least entertaining, if not useful. And as always, I like to end my podcasts with a dad joke because, I think they're great. And so without further delay, I once worked with a deaf guy in therapy. Now, I didn't work with him about his deafness. He seemed at peace with that. But he struggled with symptoms of depression. And so we sat down for the first session. And he was just explaining to me how he lost his hearing and the accident that caused hearing loss and all this stuff and going to the doctor and the doctor kind of, explaining what happened and what the prognosis is and if he can get his hearing back or not and hearing aids and all these things. It's a very sad story, for sure. So I could see why depression was part of his story because, it was kind of like it was a tragic thing that happened to him that caused his hearing loss. And at one point, there was a kind of a break in the conversation. He kind of stopped sharing his story. And I was trying to empathize with him. And, he was telling me about, leaving the doctor's office and, walking away feeling really sad and confused and kind of like shell-shocked. And I actually said, wow, that sounds really difficult. That it must have been so hard to hear all that. All right.